Enthalpy. It's a very important term being used in thermodynamics. So what is enthalpy? It is a process, or when a process takes place at constant pressure, either heat is being absorbed or released, and that heat which is being absorbed or released is equal to the enthalpy change. And sometimes enthalpy is also known as heat content. Enthalpy is an energy-like property, or we could say that it is a state function, and yes, of course, it will have the dimension of energy. And enthalpy of the system is being represented by the letter H. So immediately when we say how do we represent enthalpy, or what is the formula being used in order to represent enthalpy? Enthalpy H is actually the sum of internal energy and the product of pressure and volume. So we could say enthalpy is the sum of internal energy and the product of pressure and volume. So we could say H is equal to U plus PV, where H is the enthalpy of the system, U is the internal energy of the system, P is pressure, and V is volume. As I said, enthalpy, it has a dimension. So basically enthalpy value is determined entirely based on the temperature, pressure, and the composition of the system. But we should remember, enthalpy is not measured directly. We always try to measure only the change in enthalpy, and the change in enthalpy is only being measured, not the enthalpy. And enthalpy, we can say that it is equal to energy by mass. That is why the unit of measurement for enthalpy in International System of Unit is the joule. So when we say enthalpy and heat flow, how do we relate that? Enthalpy and heat flow, if we want to relate, we should know what is exothermic and what is endothermic reaction. An exothermic reaction is actually a chemical reaction that will release energy through light or heat. And endothermic reaction are chemical reaction in which the reactants will actually absorb heat energy from the surrounding in order to form product. So when we say the relation between the exothermic and endothermic with enthalpy change, we could say that if it is exothermic, heat is being released and the value of the delta H, that is change in enthalpy, will be negative. And for endothermic, the heat is being absorbed. So the value of your change in enthalpy is positive. And how do we say that enthalpy change? Because we are not able to measure enthalpy, hence we could only measure enthalpy change. So what is enthalpy change? The amount of heat which is being evolved or absorbed in a reaction that is carried out at constant pressure, we call it as enthalpy change. And enthalpy change will of course apply to reaction only if it is done at constant pressure. Suppose if we say that we know the standard enthalpy of formation of the reactant and the product, then we could calculate the enthalpy change of the reaction as del H of the product minus del H of the reactant. Hence, enthalpy change could be calculated with a simple formula that it is the difference of the enthalpy value of the product and the reactant.